phones, but it's a great pleasure to welcome Anne Coates, who lives in East Dulwich and who I first met in 2013 when I joined the Dulwich Deanery Synod, of which for many years she was the lay chair. So it came as a little bit of a surprise when in 2016 she published the first in this series of novels, and it was a wee bit racy. And obviously very successful, as number 5 was published earlier this year. And for those of you on Zoom, you can, I'm sure, buy it on from all good booksellers or on Amazon or whatever. But for those of you here, Kathy from College Books in Croxton Road has a little stall at the side. And I think that's quite enough from me. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much. And don't be beguiled by the looks of a lay chair, is what I can say. You probably saw on your newsletter that my background is in book publishing, magazine publishing and journalism. And this really has been the basis of where I got my ideas from most of the time. So my published works include short stories for magazines, and 2 collections of those are published, and also prize-winning flash fiction. If you're not aware of what flash fiction is, it's a short story that's written to a very tight number. So it might be 99 words or 75 words. Sorry, can you not hear us? I'm sorry. Okay.
These technical things.
Anyway, if you like flash fiction, you can always log on to our website and you can read them for free. So that's that. I also, because my degree was in English and French, so I also translated from French for magazines, and also I translated 2 novels for W.H. Allen, one of which was a very large spy novel, which apparently was made into a film, although nobody told me, no royalties there, and another very erotic French novel that my mother actually read, and I was quite shocked. So I've also abridged books for Reader's Digest. So I abridged their non-fiction and their fiction series. I started off abridging for them in UK books, but then I started working for Australia. And a lot of the books of the non-fiction are great for giving you inspiration and ideas for what you might like to investigate and write about. So I've written 7 non-fiction books, and 2 of which are for school children. And the others I wrote about only children, applying to university, surviving university, parenting teenagers and parenting discipline. And I founded a parenting website, which is an obvious lead on from that. I currently review books for The Arbitorian, which is an online magazine which reviews restaurants, theatres, holidays, and books. And books now. Books came up because of the pandemic. You know, suddenly they wanted, what can we fill our pages with? Book reviews. So a lot of my previous work has informed my fiction. And I actually wrote the first book, which is Dancers in the Wind. And I've got the hardback here, which nobody buys, you know. So I'll keep that for me. Yes, so Dancers in the Wind came about after I had interviewed for News of the World a prostitute and a police officer at King's Cross. And it was to go, the article was to go along with a television programme about King's Cross and how they were cleaning up the area, etc., etc. Well, this was in the early 90s. And so hence why the book is set in the 90s, where the characters stay. When you're talking about inspiration, I think it comes from a moment or something like that. And when I was this article was the first I'd done for News of the World. It's the first time I had interviewed a prostitute. Not the first time I'd interviewed a policeman, but the first time I'd interviewed a prostitute. I was quite nervous. And they sent me over by bike a bag full of money to give her cash. And they said to me, whatever you do, make sure she's done the interview and the photographs before you give her the money. And I thought, well, not that stupid, you know. But the stupidity of it was that it had my name and address on the envelope. And afterwards, I thought, well, that was really stupid, actually, because now she knows where I live. And if she ever, you know, you just don't know, do you, how people turn up suddenly. And I was woken up at 2 o'clock one morning and there's a knock on the door. I sort of looked out the window and things like this. There was nobody there. But my what if went. What if it was that prostitute who turned up in the middle of the night? So in fact, in Dancers of the Wind, I'm giving it all away. She does. So she does turn up. So that was a real, and out of Dancers in the Wind, I also had other prostitutes that I had already interviewed. I interviewed the English collective of prostitutes. It became a bit of a theme at one time. So I could use all the things that I'd already done and knew about, and added a bit more. And one of the things that things people always say, or people who know me say, probably not David, would say something like, well, she's really you, isn't she? Hannah Weybridge is you. And I think, yes and no. And there's a lovely quote from Virginia Woolf. And she said, every secret of a writer's soul, every experience of his life, every quality of his mind is written large in his works. I would change that round to her works at the end of it. But it's absolutely true. Where else do you get it from but you? And somebody recently said, oh, I know you. You know, I've known Anne for such a long time. And Hannah Weybridge is her. And I just smiled sweetly and said, I'm also every murderer in my books. So don't get on the wrong side of me. So that was how Dancers started. And Dancers is set, obviously, at King's Cross and East Dulwich Way. So it's quite a nice walk down memory lane. I've checked all the shops and everything else. So in the second book, when I wrote this one, I wrote it in the 90s. And I submitted it to a few agents and publishers, and each one said, oh, well, if you change this and if you do that. And in the end, I thought, I'm not actually sure that would be my book anymore. You know, so I just put it in the bottom drawer. It was literally a manuscript. Put it in the bottom drawer. And then in 2015, I had a spare afternoon and I thought, oh, I'll clear out all these drawers. And I found my manuscript and I read it and I thought, it's not that bad. And I could rewrite here and do a bit this, that, and that. And so I found a publisher. And of course I was delighted. And he said, oh, I see it as a trilogy. Oh. And as it would happen, I had written the first 3 chapters of the next book, although I don't know why I wrote them or I can't remember at all. But I had written that, so I knew where I was going. So I started with the next book. So Death Silent Judgment is a murder that happens initially, well, the first murder happens at St. John the Evangelist, Waterloo. At the time, I had never been there. Subsequently, I spent a lot of time there. And it's about a dentist who ran a sort of pro bono surgery for the down and outs who used to live in the Bull Ring. You remember at Waterloo with the Bull Ring and everything. And I thought, I'm so clever, I made all this up, you know. And then I was at a launch for this book, and somebody said to me, oh, she said, I was actually the senior social worker who organised all the pro bono in the work in the crypts. I thought, oh, well, I must have tuned into it, but I certainly didn't know about it. And I didn't know any dentists. I didn't know homeless because I used to work in Waterloo, so I used to walk past the ballroom as well. And I didn't know where I was going with the character of Liz, who is her best friend and has been away working for a charity, comes back and is found dead. And I think we've all had experiences of a friendship that ended either by death or was changed by circumstances. And you sort of think, I wonder why I never see X again. And this was a little bit exploring those emotions between the heroine and Hannah and Liz in flashbacks. So it goes back over their time together as friends and how good they were such good friends and how what happened. It was quite interesting because I had just written this and there was some rather bad publicity about several charities. And I've used one of them, I've used a real charity. Fortunately, I was able to change it to a made-up charity very quickly so that nobody could sue me or anything like that. So, because I'm really, I'm quite amazed by charitable work. And so I would have been very sad to, lost out on that one. So that one came from Waterloo, all the environs of Waterloo and back here, East Dulwich. And then Songs of Innocence is about forced not arranged marriages, forced marriages in the Asian community and families. It's only about that. But I've worked on several books written by Asian women who had been forced into marriage or have been sent away to Asia to be married, and some of the terrible things they had to put up with. And I wanted something a bit different as well. I didn't just use that. So I have a completely different cast of characters, and the first person is the first body, as it were, is nothing to do, has not been set up for arranged marriage or anything like that. And her body is found by two little boys fishing in Peckham Rye Pond, where there's a lovely sign that says no fishing. And they get up really early in the morning and go fishing. And then when they pull in their line, they actually pull in the body. So they start off the story. So it was really nice to bring it back to Peckham Rye and where I'm walking around and exactly. I'm very aware that there's a lot of discussion about appropriating other people's cultures. And I'll tell you straight away, I've never been a prostitute. I have never murdered anybody. And I certainly, so I wouldn't wish to appropriate, but that's not to say that you can't imagine murdering somebody, quite frequently at times, or you can't imagine what it's like to be in that family situation. It's never written from the Asian viewpoint. It's written from the viewpoint of a journalist who is investigating it. So she's not trying to take over their culture or what they are doing or anything else. She's just investigating. And that all gets rather nasty as well. Which brings us to Perdition's Child, which they all follow on very quickly to each other. And this was inspired, I edited a book by an Australian man who had been part of the child migration scheme, which ran for a very long time. And I think it's only the 70s when they really stopped that. And he had come back to the UK to try and find his biological family and to find out why he ended up in Australia, because, you know, it was why sort of thing. So in this, the first body is in Dulwich Library, keep it local, and he is an Australian man trying to find out about his family. A lot of the children who were sent over were abused in Australia. I mean, it's a part of our history and Australia's history, which is really quite appalling. And a lot of them were abused in religious institutions as well. And this is where this man had come from. He'd been my character had come from, and he died. And then there's another Australian, and another Australian, and nobody can work out, well, except Hannah obviously does, why, you know, these Australian men are suddenly being targeted. But it turns out that they were all in one of these religious institutions and had been abused. So it's a very neat, you know, way that they've come back, and some of them have done really well. You know, it's not that they weren't unhappy. They obviously, some of them were haunted by their childhood traumas, but some of them had families. You know, they were fine, sort of thing. So then with that one, we had to find who was actually killing off and why. Which brought me very nicely to the pandemic, writing-wise. And I had just had Perdition's Child published, and I mean, I hated lockdown. I'm sure everybody did. Everybody's got their own horrors of lockdown. I really was not a happy person. And I thought, well, I also thought that I didn't think my publisher would take another Hannah Weybridge story. So I thought, I'll try and do something else. So I started writing a thriller, which is still on my laptop. It hasn't gone away. It's still there. And I just couldn't write in the pandemic. You know, it was just something about I just couldn't do anything. And I was sitting there thinking about my Hannah Weybridge books. And virtually each one of those, when I started, I had an image, a vision of a book, of somebody in the book. And while I was pontificating to myself about Hannah Weybridge, I suddenly had the image of an actress dead on the stage at the Old Vic. And that is where Stage Call begins. The Stage Call is very different because I can't tell you some of these things because I'll give away what happened before. But there's a reason that Hannah is not investigating at the moment. And she has been asked to write Ghost, or co-write, the memoirs of this very famous actress. And it's that actress who is found dead on stage. So by hook or by crook, Hannah gets into the investigation, and that's where we find her. And so this one brings me neatly to the one I'm now writing, which doesn't have a title, but you'll see where it goes from there. So I think for inspiration comes from three areas for me. So the people in the book, the places, and the plots. And I'm not very good at plotting. I mean, everybody says, you know, the question, are you a pantster or a plotter? You know, I wouldn't know how to plot. Well, I would, but, you know, I find plotting is not my way of writing. So I often just write things, and I write things out of sequence, and then I have to throw a lot away as well. It's not a very constructive way of writing, I must say. I think people who do plot get their work done a lot quicker than I ever do, because I have to throw things away and everything. But allowing the characters and the place and the areas move around, it actually means that you can go somewhere that you didn't know you would go at the beginning. And that's what I like about characters is, I mean, Hannah's fairly sort of set in stone, but I mean, you know who she is in each book. You roughly know who she is. But the other characters are a whole string of friends or people she's met through work or people she's helped or something like that. The characters are sort of moving in and out of her life, which is exactly what happens in our own lives, isn't it? You know, you meet somebody and then you might not see them for a few months and then you bump into them again. And that. So it's sort of wending their way in and out of each other's lives, which is what I really enjoy. And so some of them become, so I say secondary characters, but they sort of then become much more important. You know, they're the sort of second lead as opposed to third from the end saying hello at the end of a play. So with my characters, I love the way they take over. So there's a character in Perdition's Child, and sorry, not Perdition's Child, in Death's Silent Judgment. And that character really surprised me at the end of the book, well, towards the end of the book, with who that person is. When I thought about it, I thought all the way along, that character kept giving me clues. And I'd written them down, and I'd taken all these clues on board. And then right at the end, I thought, that's what it was, you know. So that was really that's fun when that happens. And that's, for me, one of the joys of writing. One of the joys of not plotted too much as well, because the characters can take you where they will and link up or not, as the case may be. I'm not really sure how time goes. Oh, we've got plenty of time. So with the characters, I try to flesh them out as much as I can, because I think they say they say it about a chain, you know, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And they say that in theatre and films as well, that, you know, if you've got a really bad actor who comes on and fluffs his lines or is awful in a film, it can actually ruin the film. Whereas when you're directing a film or a play, your smallest character should be the one who almost steals the show because they're so good. And that's what I feel like with my characters. So some of them will turn up in one book and they're just down and out, for instance. In the next book, they transform into something completely different, but you've got all the, you've got the clues, you've got the nucleus of where they're going. However, that can be a disadvantage for this non-planner, because I had, at the end of one book, a character say something about her sister. And in the fourth book, she mentions her brother. Well, the second book was already published. The fourth book, really, it had to be a brother. It couldn't be anything but a brother. I did manage to work around it in the end. I found what I thought was a neat way of changing that, so that, I could keep the sister that was in the second book, I could keep that reference without blowing apart the fact that she actually had a brother. So that is something that you have to keep juggling with a series is really important, because you suddenly realise, oh gosh, they had 3 children in that one and now they've got 2, or they've just been made something or other. So I think it's difficult, I think, to keep all your balls in the air, but certainly it's a really good idea to have a little notebook with things. I do have a blue book. I put my characters in and hopefully they all tally up at the end. So I've got this book with, so-and-so's in this and so-and-so's in that. And one of my friends, who's actually was a barrister, he said, could you not just publish a nice list of who's who for each book? I thought, actually, that's quite a good idea. I might even get down to put that on my website. But then you see, if you don't see a character coming back, you might think, oh gosh, well, he or she must have died at the end of that previous one. Not necessarily true. They might just not to be there. And I'm really, really fortunate, having been a journalist, that I've interviewed all sorts of people. I worked, you know, I've been on a gas rig in the southern North Sea. Now, that would be a really good setting for a sort of closed room murder mystery, because nobody can get off once you've arrived, you know, until the helicopter leaves. So that would be quite a good one. But I'm really very, very fortunate in the friends I have cultivated. So I have a fantastic medical friend who is so good at finding out all the things I couldn't be bothered to find out. No, that's not true. I say, what sort of drug would be used? And he would say that. I said, well, would that be the same in 1993 or 1994? He said, I'll get back to you. You know, and he does. He's fantastic. And in stage call, I had to say to him, I want somebody really badly beaten up to look as though they might not survive, but they have to. So what I want you to do is to tell me all the medical things that have gone wrong for him, but can be, you know, he can survive, sort of thing. And he sent me loads, and honestly, the amount of material he sent. I actually suggested that we started writing medical thrillers together. You know, good way of doing it. He didn't take me up on it. I can't think why he didn't. But you know, so I use. It's really lovely to have him, and I've used my teacher friends for schools, and you know, anything that I don't know about myself. And Google's wonderful, but you know, Wikipedia can be wrong. And when I was first a journalist, it was always, you check 3 sources. You know, you don't just go on Google. Well, we didn't have Google when I was first a journalist, so couldn't do it. However, you don't just use, you know, the first thing that comes up on Google that says you can do X. You have to get 3 different sources to say you can do X. And if you can't find 3 sources, the chances are you can't actually do it. So, you know, that's it. But I do have lots of good friends who are better than Google at times, which is even nicer. In the context of having a character who's so closely linked to myself, because I wrote the first book about an interview I had done, and in fact, they didn't use it. The newspaper didn't use it because it was actually too traumatic. The interviews were too, well, the interview with the prostitute was too traumatic. So although I got paid, they didn't use it. So that was it. You know, I could sit and look at that. And that's what gave me, you know, I thought, well, I could actually do a what if of the story, and no, it won't make any difference, sort of thing. But I think you have to be very careful about assuming that because somebody's written something about something they experienced, it is actually true, or that it might be true, or anything really. And I'm sure when you were reading about Hannah in the first book, that you do wonder about people, and I don't use the first person in it, so it's not sort of I went off and did X, Y, and Z. So I am asking you to believe that Hannah is different to me. She has some of my characteristics, as my daughter once said. So one of the reviewers wrote, Hannah is the sort of person you'd like on your side, especially if you have a problem. She's very prickly. She's very standoffish. And my daughter turned around and said, oh, they met you then. You can't win, really, can you? So, with my daughter, yeah. So, but there are a lot, obviously there are bits of me in there, but there are also loads of bits that have got nothing to do with me. I could no more tackle somebody physically, you know, and get them to the floor and kick them in the ghoulies or whatever, than you know, drink a pint of beer. But it's just sort of really strange that people assume that oh, well, you know, if it's Anne, I'm surprised people aren't employing me now, you know, to be their bodyguard or something if they think I could do all these things, because it's absolutely not true. And I love the fact that they say, oh, yes, well, and I can just hear your thoughts. I thought, have you heard any of my thoughts at all? Because at the moment, you wouldn't be very happy with them. I'm thinking about you. But it is very difficult to be the person Hannah and the character Hannah and the author. And when I chose her name, when I worked in magazine fiction, we always used to check names to make sure, you know, there wasn't a famous person who was called Hannah Weybridge. For instance, they used Hannah because obviously it's a variation of Anne, little joke, you know, and Weybridge because I just like the sound of it. And I did really well because if you put Hannah Weybridge into Google, you get my books. There is no Hannah Weybridge. So that's really a positive because if anybody clicks through to Hannah Weybridge, it's mine, you know. And I have to, people who are local would always know because I often use street names or road names or areas as the surname for somebody because, you know, it sort of makes it less likely that somebody's called Croxted. Not always, but, you know, it's sort of sometimes. So using names like that and finding the inspiration for names is just going for a walk, really. And if any of you like writing or thought about it, I would just go for it because putting myself in the same category, as people get older, they've got far more experiences and far more times when they could say, well, I wonder what would have happened if I had done. And then, you know, there's the story to start you off with. With some of my short stories with inspiration, I was listening to Kate Adie ages ago, and she had just discovered her biological family. And obviously she'd been adopted. So she just discovered her biological family. And I was listening to it and saying, and there was this woman, you know, and Kate Adie walked up her path like this, you know, and oh, lovely to meet you, you know, which obviously you would if it was Kate Adie. So I did a complete turnabout and said, but what would you do if you'd been put in touch with somebody and they walked up the path and they're dressed in charity clothes, charity shop clothes, you know, they look a bit down and out, look as though they haven't got two beans to rub together. Excuse me. And I think that's you know, the twist in that is, and if anybody, it's a nice one to read because the twist is that she actually is a very famous person, but she's an actress. So she has dressed up as down and out, you know, her sister and everything. And her sister's really despicable. So it's rather nice to get that one round. So for inspiration, that's what I would always go for. Go for something. And I mean, I love the film Sliding Doors. You know, it's when they keep doing that, you know, she got off here and she did that. So I think that's a fabulous way of finding ideas to write about. I've also got one of my, which I read at one event I was at, and it was about cutting up a body in the garden and burying it, wrapping it in newspaper and burying it all around the garden. And it's very, you know, I think it's a 99-word one. And the twist at the end is it was actually a child cutting up a worm. But the whole premise at the beginning is you think it's a murderer who has actually, you know, chopped up a body. Well, he has, but you know, not a human body. And so I think it's really fun to sort of turn things on their head, turn expectations on their head, and inspiration can be like that. I had over lockdown I became addicted to code words, but one of my friends used to give me a book of code words every now and again. And one time I opened it and she'd started you actually started them. How dare you? I thought, well, this is really fun, because supposing you opened a book and it's inside, it's just got help me. And so I did a twist on that one of somebody who got the book, but didn't take any notice of the help me inside it. So that's that. I can keep talking, and I can talk about publishing as well, but if anybody's got any questions, give my throat a moment or two.
Neil, are you in a position to see whether anybody on Zoom wants to ask a question? But meanwhile, happily, Helen has put her hand up. So.
It's your recommendation that we start with, we do it in temporarily, time-wise, start with the first one and then go to the last one, or can we sort of jump in anyway?
Well, I'm going to repeat that because I've been asked to repeat the question. So the question was whether you should start at the beginning and work your way through, or you can pick up and read wherever you fancy. I would hope that you could pick up any of these books and it stands on its own. You don't have to. I would obviously recommend everybody buys all five, you know? but no, I think for anybody who writes series, you wouldn't really want to start. I mean, there are only five. You wouldn't really want to start at number 19. You know, I think. But I think any of these. Have you read the ones in between?
No, actually, there were quite a few references in Stage Call to the second, third, fourth. So,
were you lost?
No, but I thought maybe it was your crafty way of trying to get me to read the in between ones.
I mean, it's quite difficult for the author not to actually bore people to tears by saying, oh, and of course, when I was in book 3, I wrote, you know, I did X, Y, and Z, you know. So you need enough references that people know why you're there or why you would go and see that person or something without actually boring them to tears with the whole book of what's gone before. I usually get somebody to read mine independently. So I usually find somebody who hasn't read any of the others to read the last one. Just to see, and sometimes they do say, "Oh, you know, you put too much in there. I've got that up a bit," or you know. So I do try and counteract that a little bit.
How did you go about making that?
I think the decision was made for me, to be perfectly honest, because as I said, I wrote the first one in 1993, and that didn't take off, I think. So I carried on doing whatever I was doing, and then by 2015, life had changed so much. You know, everybody writes a blog, everybody's got an opinion on something on Twitter or Facebook. So you don't get as much freelance journalism. It's really difficult to sell anything. Or they'll take it, but they won't pay you for it, you know. So after a while, you just sort of think, I'm just flogging a dead horse with this sort of thing. You know, and I was a staff journalist as well, so I do know what happened. You know, I know how people say, "Oh, sorry, no, we don't like that idea about X," and then they turn around to one of their staff writers and say, "Right, you can do that one." So, you know, it gets to that point, and yes, so it was a decision that was made for me. That's what I mean. Yes. Years ago, when I was a student, a whole crowd of us went to see a clairvoyant who was a little old lady, and she wasn't very well educated, and she couldn't explain some of the things. But she said, I was sitting there chatting to her because I found her absolutely fascinating, and she said, and I've got I can't say whether her experience was true or not, but she said the first time she realised that she could see the spirit world, as it were, was there was an accident in her school playground, and she saw the spirit leave the body. Whether she did or whatever, I don't know. But from then on, she went along this path to become clairvoyant. But she had me in stitches because she said, you have people come and they tell you lies, you know, so you might be the clever, and you say to me, you know, well, I can't, you know, I miss my mother so much. My mother's going, no, she doesn't. She just wants to know where the ring is, sort of thing. You know what I mean? And she said that she had loads of people sort of like pushing it. I want to say, you know, a bit like this. So whether that, as I said, you know, but that's exactly what it's like for me with my characters. And so every now and again, one of them's going like this and saying, well, I've waited such a long time and I'm still waiting for my big day. You know, when are you going to use me, sort of thing. So that's why I try and keep them well-rounded in all the books so that when they do come forward, you've got quite a lot to go on and know them.
And would you jot that down?
Sorry?
Would you jot that down when the thought comes to you?
Oh, yeah, I have got the notebook, yes. Yeah.
I'm interested to know how you write. I mean, do you write longhand, or do you first thing in the morning, or last thing at night? Or do you have a special place?
Well, I don't. Sorry? Oh, yeah, sorry. So sorry. The question was how I write, longhand or whatever, in the morning, in the evening. I write on a laptop or on my desk. I write on a computer. I actually can't read my own handwriting after that. I mean, I always have a notebook with me, and I'll sit on the bus and I'll go, oh, that's interesting. And I'll write notes, and I'm going back afterwards and think, how the hell did I write that? So yes, I do. So early mornings are my best times. However, I'm terrible at sleeping, so I often wake up, and then if something's come to me, I just sit and write it down then. But I do try and write it or type it because that way I can read it, basically. But yes, so I tend to write in the mornings more than it depends what if I've got a deadline to meet, then you know sometimes you have to actually you know get on with it at night time as well. One of the things that I find is I can go to bed with a problem, a fictional problem, and if I sort of really concentrate, then during my sleep times, I will resolve that problem, and then I can write it either in the middle of the night or first in the morning or something. That's the way to do it. It's not very pleasant sometimes.
But you fascinated me at the beginning by saying that you're very careful about looking at all the shops and getting everything accurate in the street. I'm known for memoirs, so if the memoirs are accurate, so I'm just about to publish a novel, and I've been very careful to use an anonymous village near Harrogate, because I used to live in Yorkshire, but some of the places are really real. And I've listened to the odd person who's written a novel where everything is not only so recognisable, I wouldn't want to live there. So I just wondered which you recommend.
Both. I think my novels are set in London, so you've got to have certain London areas that are obvious. I did have I had one with you actually, a guy who said he had been in the army, he was now a journalist reviewing this book, and he thought it's a load of trash anyway, and he, as a journalist, had never been invited to any of these posh places. I didn't respond because you're always told not to respond. But what I did want to say was, actually, I went to every single one as a journalist. That's how I can write about them, because I've been there, so I could set the thing. So I know a couple who write crime, and they've got a fabulous idea. I thought this idea was fabulous anyway. So they use made-up areas and places, and they just get a map of any old place, but then they change it and they write, Joe lives here, this is the church, and change the names of the roads, but they map it out, which I think is a fabulous idea for doing a fictional place, because then as soon as you look at it, how long it takes you to get from A to B, and a lot of writers don't take that into account sometimes, they booked a taxi to take them round the corner or something. So I would recommend both. I think if you're setting, lots of people set their books in, big cities, and you've then got to have some allusions to famous buildings and areas. You could make up, a cul-de-sac called XY, but I wouldn't. Personally, I loved the idea of the map. I've got my map ready for one that will be different, because I just think that's a lovely idea of having your maps set out and putting all your people in place. I have another friend who actually sort of sets up like theatres, and she uses Lego people, and she puts her Lego people around and everything. So it looks fantastic, So I went to a party, a book party recently, and 2 people came up. I couldn't believe my luck. 2 different people came up and said, "Have you got an agent for?" No, please take me. I never heard anything anymore. Loads of people do get offers on their books, and nothing ever happens, which is incredibly sad. I know loads of people that's happened to. One of the things that also happens is if, for instance, I've got a famous film producer who was going to say, right, I'm going to do your Hannah Weybridge books. And then somebody wrote something very similar. They would put an option on the something similar to keep it out of the way. Sorry, who am I talking? Sorry, yeah. So they would put an option on it to stop it being published. And that does happen. And a friend of mine was absolutely devastated once because she said, I can't believe that they're not publishing my book on such and such. And I said, they've got another one. She said, yes, they have. They've just published it. And I said, that's why they put a block on you. Sorry, the question, a very long question. Very long question is about self-publishing, basically, in a nutshell. And I know some people who self-publish who make so much money at it, and they are really good, but they make themselves into a company. They use proper editors, they use proper designers, they use proper print set, type designers and everything. So they literally do everything you would get from a publisher. Some of them don't. I have read some really, really awful self-published books, but I've read some that are fantastic. And I think it's the same with, to be perfectly honest, with published books. It's sometimes, I'm sure Kathy's read some that she'd rather not have read. But
I think it's the presence of the editor or the book. I'm taking fragments of sequence here, but when you read the novel, and is it the person that first reads the manuscript that does the work?
Are you talking about published books by publishers?
I think that's one.
Right. So if you submit, and we're talking about traditional publishing for the moment, right? So traditional publishing, if you have a manuscript, you send it in, and it usually lands in what is, if you're very lucky, in what is known as a slush pile. And a very junior member of staff usually reads the slush pile. And if you get through that, it then goes up the chain, as it were. And if you're really lucky, then you will get published. But there are lots of people who it takes forever to get published. And it's not because their book wasn't any good or their writing wasn't well done or anything like that. It's just the luck of the draw sometimes. I mean, I used to read competition entries. And I can tell you, I can look at the first sentence of something and it goes in the bin. Well, perhaps I read the second sentence as well. But that I had somebody who said he was a police officer who was now writing, and he said, would you read and edit my manuscript? And I thought, oh no. So I said, I tell you what, as a mate, I will read it and let you know what I think. If anything else happens, we can talk about that later. And he said, I can take anything you say on the chin. And I read it and I thought, oh, I don't know where it's come from this. It is so awful. I tried to then think the positive things I could say. He took me out for lunch at the Buddhist centre, actually. I couldn't even have a drink. And I said to him, well, basically, your story starts on page 200. And he looked at me, he didn't speak to me for a long time afterwards. He did get, he's had 3 novels published. Now, whether he really took what I said, I read one of them and I thought, I don't think this is the same writer. But maybe he got rid of all the rubbish and then wrote, much better and had a very good editor. I don't know. But I was in conversation with him a while ago and he said, have you said that to me? Ages to get over it. And he said, tell me the truth. Not many people want to know the truth. But going back to self-publishing now is much more better thought of. But that's because people are being professional about it and they're using professionals to do it. So,
you mentioned that people ask you at parties for the name of your agent. Did you ever think of having an agent, and what would your advice be to a prospective author whether they should try and get an agent?
Well, we used to have a foreign rights agent for all my journalism, and this woman contacted me and said, I would like to represent you. I said, you are joking. I said, surely every country's got their own journalists. They don't need what I've just written or something. She said, no, you'll be surprised. And every month I got a check from her. It was a big check. But she sold stuff and she sold stuff and she sold stuff. When I wrote my book on only children, I had a different agent and he said, let me do the foreign rights. And Bloomsbury said, no, we do all that. But they sort of got a bit they got sidetracked by something called Harry Potter. I've never forgiven her. So subsequently, I've contacted a couple of agents, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, sort of thing. I mean, what's really frustrating, I think, for authors is that you can go to a party and somebody will say to you, an agent said to you, oh, well, yeah, do keep in touch. Well, let me see what you've written. And you sort of send off this email thinking, yes, like that. And you get dim codes. Thank you, but no thank you. And you realise that it probably never even got to the person. Well, that's what somebody said to me. It went to the slush pile or whatever. So I think we're going to, there's some more questions coming in, I'm not sure. I think I would love an agent who worked with me and for me over a broad spectrum of everything. I don't think there are that many who are really interested in smaller authors. But the ones that are, some of the really good small publishers are quite happy to take books from you without an agent. So that's fine. Recently, I obviously belong to quite a few groups for writers. And at the moment, there seems to be a real thing about agents not fulfilling what they're doing. So, it would be lovely. I mean, I know a couple I've got my eyes on. I smile at them every time I see them.
Now, I was thinking, I hope that I'm near enough to be heard. The question was, if you had a legacy from your books, what would you want it to be and say?
What do you want people to say?
That's a good question. I'd love people to be saying, my goodness, we better get this on telly. and that's not so strange. I mean, Bridgerton, which has just been on, those books were published 20 years ago. So there is hope. While there's life, there's hope, you know. So yes, yeah.
Okay, I'll ask happily. If a film company did show interest in one of your books, which actress would you want to play the lead?
I have got. It's really difficult for the female actor. I have got some set up for some of the male characters because if I see somebody, I think, oh yes, that's how I see my character. I keep a photograph of my laptop. So I can look at them and check back and say, oh yeah, that's where his hair goes, and those glasses are that way. And yes, so I do use a lot of. I see somebody's photograph that I really like, or not I particularly really like, but I think that is definitely so and so. Hannah, I don't know. I've no idea about Hannah.
No. Okay.
Perhaps for those who haven't read the books, a flavour of the sort of person she is by naming one or two who might be in the frame, do you think?
I don't know, because when I wrote it, those actresses now are all too old. They're all too old. I was just trying to think. I mean, there are some actors that I think are so good, it wouldn't really matter about age and how they looked, because I like Anne-Marie Duffy, is it, who is not physically, you know, she's blonde and all that, but she could easily be her hair reddened up and everything. And I think she's such a good actress that she'd be brilliant at it.
What about Suran Jones?
Yes, sorry. The question was Suran Jones. Yes, I mean, another really good actress, and I love the fact that she came from Coronation Street. Those people who don't follow it. Yes, Suran Jones is and I mean, I absolutely. Now I can't remember her name. She's gone straight out of my head. There was another Korean actress. And I'm just trying to think, but she was in, no, that's gone as well, really, really good. Oh no. She played police officer, she wasn't, Sarah Lancashire, who is fantastic. She's a bit old for it.
No, remember Jack Warner went on playing Dixon of Dock Green when he was about 30 years old, and then the police would have let him carry on.
That's very true. That's very true.
Anyway, perhaps if that's the end of the questions on Zoom, those of us here, I think, will be getting a bit thirsty. So can I thank Anne not only for a lively presentation, but also a very lively discussion, which I'm sure will continue over the tea.
Thank you very much.